For the second ILO, we will introduce you to the concept of the limits to growth and overshoot. The Club of Rome was founded in 1968 as an informal association of independent leading personalities from politics, business, and science, men and women who are long-term thinkers interested in contributing in a systematic, interdisciplinary, and holistic manner to a better world. It raised considerable public attention in 1972 with its report, The Limits to Growth. The purpose of the Limits to Growth report was not to make specific predictions, but to explore how exponential growth interacts with finite resources. It found that there are limits to growth of the world economy due to the finite stock of non-renewable resources and the finite capacity of the natural environment to absorb pollution. The main ideas of the limits to growth are outlined in the following short video.
Our book, Limits to Growth, was the first concrete effort using a computer to look at trends that unfold over decades, even a century. We were trying to understand long-term physical demands on the planet. And in the 70s, we were thinking that probably in the period 2010 to 2030 was when the planet would start to encounter limits. And that when you hit the limits, the tendency is to overshoot them and collapse, not to even out in a nice, orderly fashion. The book was officially released in March of 1972, and the inaugural event was a press conference in Washington, D.C.
To have this opportunity.
The book was rather quickly translated into 35 languages and sold millions. It was a phenomenon.
Here is what Dr. Meadows' computer shows. Since the year 1900, the Earth's resources, there at the top of the chart, have been steadily used up as population, food consumption, and production of goods have soared. Ahead of us, sometime after the year 2000, this computer study foresees calamity. Resources drop more steeply, and food and production follow suit. Population continues to expand for perhaps one more generation, then collapses calamitously as deprivation takes hold.
If we look at some of the features of the modern era, along with exponential growth of the population, we've also continued to match that with exponential growth in consumption of natural resources, and also in things like foreign direct investment, paper consumption, damming of rivers, increase in communication and telephonies, and water use. However, as the video pointed out, the limits to growth thesis argues that our consumption of resources cannot keep up with what is available to us. To overshoot means to go too far, to grow so large so quickly that limits are exceeded. When an overshoot occurs, it induces stresses that begin to slow and stop growth. Population and industrial growth are inherently exponential, and that exponential growth takes one to any existing limit quickly, whatever its magnitude. Global society will most likely adjust to limits by overshoot and collapse and not by S-shaped growth. However, sustainable development is possible if important changes are made. Politics and the market are inherently unsuited to adopt constructive policies that can lead to sustainable development. This is illustrated in the diagram. The cause for overshoot and collapse are always the same. First, there is growth, acceleration, and rapid change. Second, the growth drives a depletion of some resource required for the growth or an increase in some resource that harms the growth. This is illustrated by the red line on the graph. The Earth has a certain carrying capacity for all resources, illustrated by the green line on the graph. The carrying capacity of the Earth has increased due to advances in technologies for agriculture, for example. However, this capacity is not infinite. Third, this dynamic causes a contraction, deceleration, or decay resulting in a collapse. This is marked by the rapid deficit in the graph. Therefore, only a society that has in place informational, social, and institutional mechanisms to keep in check the reinforcing feedback loops that cause exponential population and capital growth may become sustainable. Sustainability does not mean zero growth. It must provide sufficiency and security for all. Rules for sustainability should be put into place not to destroy freedoms, but to create freedoms or protect them. Therefore, some of the suggested guidelines as a way to mitigate against limits to growth are to make changes in the informational, social, and institutional mechanisms. Also, it requires us to manage resources more effectively and thus manage growth.